July 13th, 2023. 113 days from November the 3rd. Very interesting date. We were talking about this date yesterday and all the strange ritualistic deaths, conspicuously of 33-year-olds, occurring on this day. This day being associated with the famous blackouts of Manhattan on 42nd Street, 1977, 2019, and these taking place on 42nd Street. And there's all kinds of 42s encoded into this. I think Oppenheimer might have come out today. I just saw a poster for it, by the way. I was out today watching a movie for review purposes, The Sound of Freedom. We were talking about it yesterday, and I had somewhat surmised that this is some kind of cynical marketing ploy to the QAnon crowd. And I think I've been more than vindicated. And I didn't start writing my review yet because there's a lot of, I think, investigation I need to do into the principal characters involved in the production and around it. So the title of the live stream is Passion of the QAnon. And I have a number of reasons why I'm naming it this. Joined by 420 Land Party, Araku Calzone, Junders Pluckett, P Trippa 103, Frank Murr, Tim and Vic 131 on YouTube, and Diana South from D Live as usual. If you're in the chat, just say hello. We'll hand out wrenches later. All right, Lord Laney and others are piling in. We're on 5 platforms, so it shouldn't be difficult for everyone to find their way in here. A number of things I wanted to talk about today. Ray Epps and the fake populist Tucker Carlson, the Riddler, and the scapegoat narrative for 1-6. And the scapegoat narrative is very weak here, and I'm seeing it being pushed by all the usual suspects. The passion of the Q is the main thing, and I want to get into that because it actually ties in to something I've been unraveling for some time. And it has to do with what I talk about, the split in the way they market the psyops to the left and the right. Well, it seems like the scientific devil, the virus, the scientifically diagnosable form of evil, is targeting the left, the godless left. But for the right, they still use the old school concepts of sin, and they brought out this thing called social contagion to explain the spread of sin and the need to separate, to quarantine from the sinners who don't believe in God, but they want you to wear a mask. And I want to point out too that quarantine comes from Lent, where Jesus spends 40 days trying to avoid sin. And I'm saying that virus is the updated concept of sin. But what I've determined here is that there's a very strong effort by the top echelon of all the right-wing pundits to create a satanic panic climate. And this is an ongoing thing. It's the fearocracy's bifurcated psy-war that has to have a devil for each side, and they still are using the old school version. And this all ties in to the Passion of the QAnon, played by Jim Caviezel, who played Jesus in Passion of the Christ, which brings Mel Gibson, the director Mel Gibson, into the picture, who is tied into the QAnon movement in kind of a strange way. They have their way of drafting people into their movement and misattributing quotes to them. And they build up this mythology, but it all comes into play here. And there's a number of fascinating connections along with these characters, like Mel Gibson, kind of a Hollywood outcast. Jim Caviezel is portraying himself as a Hollywood outcast. Tim Ballard, the hero of the story that this movie's based on, Tim Ballard is sort of an outcast going against the bureaucracy of the deep state working in the DHS that doesn't care about the kids. So you have these 3 instances of these persecuted martyr kind of guys. And then, of course, Jim Caviezel, Passion of the Christ, is just, it all ties in, as you'll see. Junder says, I got 3 YouTube notifications at once. Yeah, I opened up the old sock drawers, and there's going to be more. And we're gonna definitely expand into TikTok and otherwise. Joined by Peace Circle 360, Linda Curtis, Osher. Linda says, can't listen, got to go to work early. We'll listen to the replay. Yeah, and I'll have the replay posted immediately after. If you're on Patreon, you get it by your email, or if you're on Spotify, and even the infiniteplainsociety.com website. If you get live notifications there, I also am sending out archive links, like the night of. And we have the morning program, or rather D program, the IPS morning D program, which didn't happen today. I was setting up the internet. We're waiting for the router. Once I have the router, phones go back on, and we will adjust accordingly, because I'm probably gonna need more time, like an extra hour just for calls. And I want to have a bit of structure to how we take calls as well. I want to have a caller queue. That way we can ditch the feds and not have to, give them too much airtime. And I don't want to, truncate the show or diminish the quality of the program, rather, because we're dropping calls. But there's a lot of people who want to talk, and not everyone here is interested in recycling, uh, basically, Fed talking points. I mean, I'm serious about this. And I talked about this yesterday. The idea that there's been this decentralization of the disinformation process. So we're being disinformed massively, but we're exiting the age of the Alex Jones. We're exiting the age of the solitary demagogue that everyone gathers around, and they're decentralizing it. And I'm finding dozens, I mean, there's hundreds, obviously, thousands of these massive Twitter channels, big feeds, and they're just posting memes all day long. And most of these, I think, are coming from a place not of trying to inform, but to drown out relevant information, to make facts irrelevant. And I think it's working. They're creating this fluid reality for the people who can just choose what to believe. Like, I believe that Ellen DeGeneres, Tom Hanks, and Hillary Clinton were shot at Guantanamo. And it's like, well, then they show up on the news again. Well, I believe that's CGI, that's a mask. So reality becomes fluid, where you can just uh, tell yourself whatever you want to believe and you believe it. I mean, it's really maddening. Joined by Portal Complex says Flat Earth Report is legendary. Funny you say that. I have a Flat Earth Report Twitter account that was blocked a long time ago. So I can't tweet, retweet, or like, but I can spy. So if you didn't know that, if you have a suspended account, you have to use these to spy. It's a use for an old sock, because you cannot look at tweets if you're not a member. They put up the barricades. They're already closing that system. The Infinite Planet Tweets has a dome over it, and they limit the number of tweets you can see, and you can't even get in unless you're a member. So what they've done here is they've destroyed something great. But we work around these things. So take your old socks that have been suspended, and you can use them to peruse Twitter accounts that block you. And that's the thing for me. I've been blocked by hundreds of people. And so if I want to read their tweets, and I do. So if you blocked me and you think I'm not reading your tweets, guess what? If you block me, I'm more interested in reading your tweets, just so you know. Joined by IFEPA73. Saw you also in the animation room. If you didn't know, we have a Discord room that's not connected to this, other than its animation. We're just trying to keep it censor free. So we don't want to leave room open for stuff that will get us censored, obviously. But a lot of our top animators are already there. And if you want to get there, go to the Gilded Room South Pole, and then you will find South Pole Studios, which are going to be more active as we go here. I'm still just getting settled in the office. I spent the day bringing in inventory. So if you're still awaiting a copy, if you didn't receive a copy of anything, I probably have it here in one of these boxes, and I'm going to make an effort here to roll everything out. We have some old copies of the tabloid that we had originally published as more or less a pilot, a very successful one. And we're going to relaunch into a tabloid format here really soon. I mean, it's just a matter of organization. And now that I have a physical headquarters, that's happening quickly. And I think within the next 24 hours, I'll have my router. Joined by Lord Dorkington, F.E. Gardner. Thank you for joining. Yeah, we're talking about a few things. One, Ray Epps is suing Fox News because they basically turned the entire right wing against him and made him the scapegoat. Like, we're supposed to believe, and Tim Pool believes this because Tucker said it, we're supposed to believe that if Ray Epps was sick that day and didn't show up, the raid at the Capitol, the riot, the insurrection thing, it wouldn't have happened. It's because of Ray Epps. Like, none of those people there have free will. You didn't know that? Oh no, the people at the Capitol, no, those were all NPCs. And someone hacked the system here, hacked their hive mind, and said, run in the Capitol, stop the certification, hang Mike Pence, and they all did it. I mean, it's absurd. And I called this out months ago when Baked Fed, who blocked me on Twitter, Baked Alaska, he was calling out Ray Epps as a Fed. And I'm like, they did this on purpose, because Baked Alaska is an obvious Fed. He was the one coughing COVIDs onto Nancy Pelosi's phone. Well, he was calling out Ray Epps as a Fed, so you would think, okay, there's some Feds among the group here. So you wouldn't recognize that they're all feds. They were all feds, with few exceptions. And if you keep up with Wu's News, who broke down in 21 minutes or less the Capitol riots, basically showing how if you do a frame by frame analysis and you check the timestamps, the whole thing was a psyop. Nobody died, nobody cried. It was all theater. And anybody who wasn't a part of it were quickly outgrouped. And there were some people there, like organic, real live streamers, who just didn't have the access everyone else did. There's no martyrs. There's no January 6 martyrs. Nobody's languishing in prison because they got caught up in something that was provoked by the left. No, not at all. It's all fake. Ashley Babbitt is not dead. I mean, Donald Trump showed up via video to her first posthumous birthday. It's kind of weird. It's like you die, and then they celebrate your birthday after. It's like I never heard of this. Like you don't start over again at 1. They don't keep counting. But Trump shows up, and the mom's there, and it's really clear they're making Ashley Babbitt into this martyr. But if you go through all of them, you can really see how Wu's News does it frame by frame, and he just put out a second installment here on his series where timestamps, frame by frame breakdown, you can pretty much deconstruct January 6th as anything other than totally pre-planned theater, stagecraft. It was a psyop. It was not a false flag. It was not the result of Ray Epps. So it's kind of funny that Ray Epps is, suing Fox News. And by the way, I think Ray Epps lived very close to the QAnon shaman. Now the American shaman. Like they lived in the same neighborhood. Like, what does that mean? Now, something else about this thing. The QAnon shaman just went at some event in Phoenix where Nick Fuentes was, and he called out Nick Fuentes on Fuentes's desire for a illegal, I guess, what is it, a 16-year-old trad wife? But he said he's not getting married till he's 30. So his future wife is, I think she's 12 right now. So out there, some 12-year-old just doesn't know it yet, but she won the Nick Fuentes lottery. And in 4 years, you're going to be washing his dishes and washing his socks and having his babies. Probably living in his parents' basement still. Okay, continuing here. Eric Creech has joined us with the popcorn. Thanks for the support there, Lord Dorkington. We're at Cash App Infinite Plane Society, and everything is going into this operation, which, as you can see, we are definitely moving forward. I said crawl, walk, run. We're officially walking when I have the modem in here and we're doing open phones. Running is when we have our reporters actively engaged in various areas of research. 420 Land Partier 69 says, regarding Babbitt, I've seen better acting and special effects at the High School Musical's Laughable. The names are kind of interesting. Ashley Babbitt's name could be a reference to Louis Sinclair's book. I think it's called The Babbitts, isn't it? It's about like these arch conservatives fighting against communism. And she's literally wrapped in an American flag when she dies. Very laughable. My favorite death, my favorite fake death on 1/6 was Roseanne Boylan, who has a flag that says, "Don't tread on me." And she supposedly got trampled to death. But if you look at the before photos and the during photos, different pants, different shoes, totally different style. The dummy on the ground that was a cop the cop on the ground face down at the same time was like one of these training dummies. I mean, the whole thing, again, it was like a mass casualty drill. It was a psyop. Speaking of psyops, I'm still investigating it, but there are some indications that the lady on the airplane that freaked out about the reptilian was likely an actress, and that was likely an airline drill of some kind on, having to do with how they deal with unrulies, mentally ill people, etc. So it's likely it was a psyop, and someone even found a photo of her where it looked like she was grinning, duper's delight, which is very difficult for some people to hide. So here's what Tim Pool said. This is a tweet from earlier. He said, quote, "Footage actually shows Epps at the front line storming the barricades to the Capitol, but the corporate press keeps covering up for him." Again, this is a lame scapegoat story that Ray Epps made this thing happen. This is a contrived scapegoat narrative to distract you from the fact that it was fake. And I tell people this thing was fake on Twitter, and most people can't even process it. Like it doesn't comport with their reality, so they filter it out. Oh, that didn't come through the screen. It's not what the corporate media said or the corporate media light. I mean, the alt media is big media. They're part of the same ecosystem. We're not in their domed, closed system. Now, my response to Tim Pool was J6 was a psyop, totally staged. This quote, the feds provoked it quote, is a false flag theory. These counter narratives are used to conceal the staged nature of the bipartisan psyop, which is actually against all Americans. Tim Pool is a shill for government-controlled NWO media psywar. Yes, he's shilling. He's gatekeeping. There's no other way to explain it. And again, Woo's News, and I need to reach out to Woo's News, he calls out the entire thing as nothing but psywar actors. He shows them by name, and he shows the outgrouping of people who aren't part of the psyop. But now Tucker is going viral for saying the feds provoked it, that it was real and people died. But it's because Ray Epps provoked it or feds provoked it. So this would classify it as a false flag. Now, Tucker's listeners are dupes if they believe that. I mean, he's entertaining, but the fake populism will never tell the truth about the psyop that was designed to defame all those people that he claims to speak for. It was designed to ensnare and defame and disempower them. I mean, honestly, just objectively speaking, I can't think of a bigger Judas goat than Tucker Carlson. Like he almost surpasses Alex Jones at this point. I mean, it's kind of a toss-up between the two of them. Okay, catching up on your comments here. Demetria 101 said, Airplane Girl showed the as above, so below hand signs while she was freaking out. Yeah, I saw that. Very interesting. Into the Break said, I like what Jake said about the airplane incident, about it being a ruse to implement psychological evaluations before being able to buy a ticket. Fascinating. Well, that's the way to look at these things. You know, they do these fake events, but it's not enough to say, oh, that's fake. Move on. It's a distraction. No, you got to say, well, why? What's the purpose behind the psychological operation? These things do not happen in isolation, and they're perception management operations. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And I think that's where this movie kind of falls into things, because human trafficking is real. You know, sex trade, slavery, and in many societies, it's institutionalized, and it's worse than the movie even indicated. I'm talking about Sound of Freedom. So I watched this movie, and I figured this was just some cynical marketing thing tying into the QAnons. I figured it was Q porn, and I think I'm right. I think it was. And I mean, if you like the movie 8mm, you might understand where this movie's coming from. Kind of gritty, true crime, and it's totally believable. Not quite a documentary. I think I would rather have had a documentary that gave it more credibility. Because the problem is that the actor who played Jesus Christ, you know, Jim Caviezel, the problem is that he is a staunch QAnoner, and he's full blown. Like he's like, oh yeah, they're drinking adrenochrome, that it's $70 for a barrel of oil, but you can get $70,000 for a barrel of wombs and body parts. Like he's full blown. And this is by design. And all of his defense of the QAnon movement lends to this interpretation that I have here, that when he's describing the Q movement, he's saying, oh, they're misunderstood. They're the real Christians. And the critics of the movie, the critics of Q, are the Pharisees. And again, the fact that this guy played Jesus Christ is hugely significant, because we're talking about archetype casting. And I think you even call it archetypal transference, where he embodies, and this is a very successful and powerful and important movie, Passion of the Christ. So that face becomes emblazoned in the minds, and he becomes this image that goes into the minds of the people that this new movie is targeted at. And he is portrayed right now, and he's portraying himself as being persecuted by the media, just as Mel Gibson was persecuted by Hollywood. And again, Tim Ballard, the hero, going against the DHS. Now, continuing here. I watched the movie. I got a strong sense in terms of its aesthetics. It felt like psyop reinforcement vibes, like psyop and propaganda first, art second. And criticizing it as a film, I mean, I got vibes like this was the Boston bombing movie, where it's kind of a documentary, real, contrived, but you can tell it's got a message. And anyway, it felt like I was watching psyop reinforcement. Like, again, I think this might have been something to reinforce not just the Q thing, but this is bigger than that, because the whole Q movement about the ring of vampires that run the world, that's based on blood libel, which were the accusations that Jews would kidnap Christian children if they weren't baptized and suck their blood with straws. So these are just recycled old stories that go back centuries. And the Q draws from so many sources. I mean, the Q is like a Frankenstein of all these various conspiracies melded into one. And that's a major part of it. And that's a big part of what this Jim Caviezel actually keeps reemphasizing, that this is the real thing. I mean, he's been on Steve Bannon's show, War Room, talking about adrenochrome, and Steve Bannon just like soaks it all up. And that's because it all ties in, I think, to this bigger narrative, this meta narrative of the body of Christ and the synagogue of Satan, and the fact that Bannon and Jack Posobiec, who are instrumental in Pizzagate, this modern satanic panic, are both big time Catholics, and they don't espouse these anti-Semitic views, but they have this replacement for it. So they can't say blood libel, they can't say, but they'll say, oh, George Soros. They'll say satanic adrenochrome drinkers, but it's the same thing. And we're talking about very old worldviews, and that's what they're bringing back here. So when he says that he represents more authentic, real Christianity, by saying that they're the real Christians, that QAnon are Christians, that's kind of where it's leading. And Q is a religion. It's not just a political movement. And that's been the case from the beginning. Now, the character in the movie, Tim Ballard, there's some intrigue around him. But the name Tim is interesting because in the movie, Tim is given a pendant that has a Bible verse, Timothy 6:11. Now, if you've been following this channel, we've been talking about the number 6:11 and how it ties into so many psyops having to do with the white nationalists, with the right wing and the upcoming Kraken and this schism in our society. But 6:11 is the death date of 33-year-old Timothy McVeigh. So I thought that's kind of interesting. You have Tim 6:11 right there, as a central part of the movie. But the Sound of Freedom is totally pushing QAnon, Adreno stuff in another form. Like it's not overt, but it's made overt through the actor. So the movie's kind of clean. The movie doesn't make these associations overt. There's no winks or nods. There's no 17s. But if you listen to this actor and where he goes and what he says, yeah, it's all there. But again, the comparison here, I think that's worth making, is Jim Caviezel fighting Hollywood, Tim Ballard fighting the DHS, Mel Gibson versus Hollywood. Now, I heard something today about Steve Bannon's role in launching Pizzagate, and Steve Bannon's connected to Jack Posobiec, who was the one who went into Comet Pizza. He wasn't the one that shot up the place, but he was the one that live streamed from there. And the idea I get is that he's a central player in this satanic panic. If you don't know much about Jack Posobiec with Human Events, he went to the Dodgers game where the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence drag team was performing, and they brought a bunch of Catholics and they did a public exorcism. He's the one who's been counting how many days in hell Audrey Hale has been since she shot up the school in Nashville, and how she shot Adam in the wall of the chapel and the stained glass, and how this represented something about killing God's first, some kind of satanic blasphemy. But he's Mr. Satanic Panic is my point. And there's a lot to say about that on the side. But again, I think it's interesting here that what I heard today about Bannon's role in Pizzagate, that it seemed to be targeting a couple of areas here. One of them, and this was from a podcast that was breaking down Jim Caviezel, they were suggesting that Bannon was targeting Hispanics, Hispanic voters, when he got behind the QAnon thing and Pizzagate specifically, the Pizzagate thing rather. Why? Because apparently they wanted to paint up Hillary Clinton as a practitioner of satanic black magic, basically just a smear campaign, and it's worked. I mean, she's been called a witch many times for many years. I mean, this is not new. The satanic panic thing's not new either. It's actually part of our it's part of this infrastructure of the left right paradigm where, again, left is more about the virus and climate change, and the right is more about sin and wrath of God. But it's interesting because the movie it's takes place at the border. A lot of it's at the open borders, and so it draws attention to, hey, look, open borders is the cause of human trafficking. So you can see it's definitely a right wing thing. And then who was behind the build the wall thing? Steve Bannon. He was the one who absorbed millions of dollars, which didn't build anything, but he was raising money to build the wall. In fact, one of his friends went to jail for it. He was granted a pardon right before Trump left office. But you have the open border, you have the demographics it's targeting. Like, I think this movie is just a cynical ploy to reboot QAnon. And another element to it, this was that the DHS will go arrest the pedos here, but they're not going to go overseas. Like, they'll arrest the ones who are consuming it, but they're not going to go out there and stop it at the source. And so Tim Ballard had to go rogue, more or less, to fight this. Well, this is the story of QAnon, where this is just the status quo, but you got these white hats who are like, no, we got to stop this. So the white hats are actually rogue, going against the deep state, going underground. And if you remember all the QAnon stories going back years, the children are being trafficked underground, literally. Well, Tim Ballard's movement here, his organization is called Our, which is the something underground railroad. But the idea here, of course, is that they're rescuing children off like these independent operations that are rogue, because it's the deep state. And again, they now when the movie came out, a lot of, I think they were shills. A lot of people went on TikTok saying, I went to go watch Sound of Freedom, and they turned off the air conditioner, or they left the lights on, or you couldn't hear it. So in other words, they were suggesting that because BlackRock owns AMC and George Soros is somehow involved, they were messing with people's viewing experiences, trying to prevent people from watching the movie. And that's again another form of marketing as well. Looking at your comments, we says Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I like it. Yeah, well, the Catholics don't like it because they dress up as nuns. So you have drag queen nuns who are doing adult performances. So, and I think they've been around for a while, but they were at Dodger Stadium, and there was an actual, well, first there was a prayer read in Latin by Jack Posobiec, and then you had the priests come out and do an exorcism. And by the way, this Jim Caviezel guy gave a speech at one of these QAnon things where he read the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic. Like, people think he's literally Jesus. Peter W. says, it would be good to hear we call in. Yeah, I'll have phones open soon. And I'm going to have a system set up here that I can take back-to-back calls. I don't want to platform neo-Nazis or vaxophobes. I'll debate on certain topics, but I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. Like, we know how to get banned. And it's like, do you want to get banned preaching to the choir? I don't think so. But then if you don't do it, they'll say, oh, you must be a Pfizer shill like Smith. Agent Smith was in here calling me a Pfizer shill. And I don't like that kind of rhetoric. Like this movie, Sound of Freedom. Oh, if you don't like the movie or you're critical of it, you must be in favor of child trafficking. Yeah, if you didn't watch it, you're in favor of. Tim Awesome said, I went and watched it. The sound was so low I couldn't vape. I was waiting for a loud moment that never came. Right. Well, I had a pretty nice experience in the theater I went to. Hardly anyone was there. But from what I can tell by all the previews, the company that produced it is called Angel. And they predominantly do Christian-oriented stuff. Like they had this one about Mary. It's a musical. And it's like, Mary, we know you're only 12, but God's going to impregnate you or something. And they're all dancing. I'm like, okay, so it's all just religious stuff that had to pick this up. Jim Caviezel had suggested that this whole movie was being shelved when Fox was purchased by Disney or something. So you have the Disney thing being brought into this as well. So part of the marketing here is that they don't want you to see it. That's part of the sales pitch. Let's see here. But I stayed for the whole movie. I watched it all. I'm not going to say it's a bad movie. I think a documentary would have been better with the same resources. I mean, they did include some real footage. Tim Ballard's real, or those are fake. I mean, what do you want? I can't prove it. And here's the thing: it's not like they're not um, creating fake heroes all the time. I mean, do you believe Kyle Rittenhouse was real? Do you believe Chris Kyle was real? I mean, you got to look into Chris Kyle, the basis for Kyle Rittenhouse. Drove across state lines to go shoot looters. But Chris Kyle supposedly climbed on top of the Astrodome and shot 30 people in New Orleans while they were looting. And he was called a hero for this because he's, the world's greatest sniper, had the highest body count before he was killed. But the idea that you could just go to New Orleans and start shooting looters, like imagine if somebody had shot 30 BLM, that would have precipitated some kind of major situation, national emergency. Tim Austin said it's pretty good for low budget. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad movie necessarily, but I don't know if it was movie material. I mean, maybe a Netflix, but it was kind of simple. Again, I'm not saying it was bad, but it's like if you're going to make a documentary, make a documentary. But they kind of had to embellish it. But it wouldn't have had the impact, or it wouldn't be getting the negative reviews that it's getting if it wasn't for the fact that Jim Caviezel has the passion of the QAnon. Osher says, yeah, makes you feel like you did something good in the world. Well, I was looking at some of the people in the audience, and there was like a couple of guys cheered when the first pedo who looked like a pedo. I mean, it's just like the guy had a bowl cut, and he had these like greasy hair, bowl cut, thick glasses, and he's like creeping over his computer. When he gets tackled, a number of people cheered. And then I saw a lot of the wives were like clutching their husbands when the kids were in the room. And yeah, I think that a lot of the people there were feeling very virtuous and stuff. And maybe if the theater was hot, like if the air conditioners were off, you'd feel like, well, Christ might want me to go, into the bowels of hell. Like they really do kind of make you feel, the whole movie, I think, is geared towards that. Remember Save the Children, 2016? What happened to that? Have any children been saved by the QAnoners or anybody in the conspiracy realm saying save the children? I don't think so. And it's 2023. So if you just add on some years there, well, they're all Democrat voters by now. If they haven't been rescued from the deep state, they're all voting age. Save the disaffected teenagers. At what point? Okay, continuing on your comments. Joined by Lean Dion with the bat soup. At one point, YouTube actually banned the combination of emojis of the soup and the bat. You couldn't put them together. Well, look, the movie contains some very serious, it's very serious material. But again, I think that documentaries would be better. And I think that this was a cynical ploy to reinvigorate the QAnon movement. And again, I think it's attached to the bigger story of blood libel. And Jim Caviezel talks about how the elite have been doing this for centuries. Okay, continuing. I just took a few notes on it. Okay, Timothy 6:11, we talked about that. Jim Caviezel, JC, Jesus Christ. Okay, here's another interesting one. If you look at Mel Gibson and Passion of the Christ, you can just find how these characters are built up. Like Braveheart. And Jim Caviezel talks about Braveheart a few times in these interviews. And Mel Gibson has taken on a certain persona within the Q movement because he said something in like 1990 something. He had some interview where he talked about going into Hollywood and how weird it was and how he just had to get used to it. And you don't know what he's talking about. He talks about devils and people who are, I don't know, like he was so vague. But I got the impression that he was talking about political correctness, that he might have been talking about Jews. But whatever the case, he was euphemizing, but I don't think he was talking about human trafficking and adrenochrome. I don't think he was. But that has been kind of picked up to make it look like Mel Gibson has been an eyewitness to what's going on at Hollywood this whole time. And then he was in the movie The Patriot. And people are calling this movie patriotic, which I don't understand why you'd call the movie patriotic. Braveheart, he was crucified, had his guts ripped out, very Christ-like death. In Mad Max, he saves the world not with his blood, but with the last gallon of gas or gasoline. And he's walking across the plain with a pole across his back, and then he has a gas can on each side. So he's kind of crucified, about to save the world. So the Mel Gibson savior archetype thing ties into this, of course, as well. So my point is that we're looking at characters from Tim Ballard to Jim Caviezel to Mel Gibson who have all been portrayed and are portraying themselves as fighting against the Pharisees, fighting against the evil. And so are you if you buy a ticket. And I went to the site angel.com to get a free ticket because everybody supposedly pays it forward, where you enter your email and within 10 minutes you'll get a link and you'll get a free ticket. I tried it for a couple of hours and none of them bought me a ticket. Not a big deal. I mean, I'm doing movie reviews as part of our overall assessment of our media ecosystem, and you have to analyze the news and the entertainment because they're really interchangeable. As Russian Vids used to say, it's truth in the movies, lies in the news. Lean Dion says, allegedly the movie was funded by a major figure in the Mexican cartels. Oh yeah, Carlos Slim, is that the guy? Yeah, there's a few things about the movie that raise some questions, and the fact that it's super hyper partisan. Here's an excerpt from Cron.com. Caviezel openly embraces one of the more extreme versions of the QAnon conspiracy theory, positing that high-level military insiders are pursuing a secret plan to persecute a global cabal of Satan worshippers. Caviezel and the others on the fringes take it a step further, claiming that the cabal torture infants and young children to extract adrenochrome. Now, he says adrenochrome is 10 times stronger than heroin and that it's anti-aging. And I'm like, okay, well, point out to me one of these Democrat deep staters that is aging gracefully. You're telling me that Hillary Clinton is guzzling the adrenochrome? Or Madonna? Like, show me who? Tom Cruise, maybe. If anybody's doing adrenochrome, maybe Tom Cruise. Now, Tim Ballard, in an interview, kind of shocking actually, was talking about how he left the DHS because he couldn't get anything done. And he found himself just watching endless videos and documenting them so they could try to prosecute the offenders. So he says he's watched thousands of hours of child abuse videos. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not, but about Tim Ballard, this came up on my TikTok feed. Turns out that Tim Ballard has a very curious resemblance to the supposedly deceased Paul Walker. And there's some connections there. There's some interesting connections, a little tenuous maybe, but just hear me out on this. It's that Paul Walker, Fast and Furious, was on the same movie set as Q, like the literal Q, the one that we know. And, Q's being muddled by the media. They act like they don't know who he is. And we know who he is. And the person who is in the circle of individuals in the Q psyop, the one who is actually the Q dropper, this person is an actor, a New Zealander. He's been in many movies, Lord of the Rings, King Kong, but he was in Fast and the Furious with Paul Walker. He's a bartender in a scene. He barely gets any coverage at all, no lines. But my point is, it's kind of interesting. Paul Walker and Q, even being in the same room, considering that this Tim Ballard character looks like a Paul Walker, aged appropriately. And he's in a movie that is more or less part of the QAnon canon now. And of course, the basic story of the QAnon military operations going around saving people. In fact, in the movie, there's this millionaire that's recruited by Tim Ballard to finance a sting operation. And the reason he did it was he's so rich, he's bored, he calls himself Batman, and he wants to put some of his money into saving children. So he's like a good rich guy, but he's doing so, kind of like undercover. And I thought, that's kind of interesting because that's kind of how, if anything, that's how Goldfinch would be connected. Fascinating connection. Again, I'll probably expound on that later, but Diana South says, in the Pixar movie Monsters, the monsters were using fearful children's screams for energy. Oh yeah, there's a long list of movies where that's the theme. Dark Crystal, Guardians of the Galaxy, City of Lost Children, really disturbing film. But yeah, tears being extracted. I mean, yeah, why is that such a reoccurring theme? Into the Break said Adreno would be nothing like a heroin, it's adrenaline, more like crank speed, smack Adderall. Hunter Thompson described it in Fear and Loathing. Yeah, and I don't see the anti-aging properties at all. Erica Creech says, you're pretty sure actors and maybe singers are still around. It is interesting. Well, there's a few examples, and it's well within the realm of possibility, and it's basic spycraft. In fact, deep fake tech that they talk about, where they're going to put your face on some model, it's like you have these fears that are being promulgated. They're gonna do this. No, they've already done it. Jonah Mendez, director of disguise over there at the CIA for 27 years, talked about this when he was declassified. And she said you could be in a room with 6 Saddam Husseins and you wouldn't know which one is which. Sink Lloyd asks, was the air conditioning on? Yeah, the AC was on. There were no interruptions. I was trying to do a review on it there. I was just like kind of taking notes, but there's not a lot of intrigue to the story. It's kind of linear. It's a basic, gritty crime show with something of a happy ending. I'm not sure if I'm impressed by it or not. I mean, there are some good actors in the movie, I'm sure, but it just struck me as psyop reinforcement and too partisan. Like it was obviously aimed at the QAnon crowd. Peter W. says Hollywood actors went on strike tonight. It's probably why we're not seeing any riots here. Like there were the riots in France. We didn't have anything here. Why not? We have systemic racism here. Well, it's because the writers are on strike, the actors are on strike. They can't staff it. And I think a lot of crisis actors are going to lose their jobs to digital deepfakes, by the way. Like one of the reasons why these writers and actors are striking is they're like, well, they get digitized and you get paid to be an extra because they have to feed you and house you. And so you're a physical presence there that they're somewhat responsible for. But if they can just buy your image and replicate you and they don't pay you, then it's kind of problematic. Now, you do have rights that already exist to protect that. That's your right of publicity, but it seems like that's definitely a concern. And crisis actors don't have any kind of guild. I mean, I joke about it, the GAG, the Government Actors Guild, but no, the crisis actors don't have any guild. If they get replaced by CGI, there's nowhere they can turn. And sometimes, and I'm not the first to point this out, maybe it was P. Trippa, it does seem like these PSYOP scripts are being increasingly written by ChatGPT. Sink Lloyd, yeah, have you seen City of Lost Children? I don't recommend it, but let me think. There's so many movies that have this theme. Like it's kind of too prevalent to ignore. Here we go. Old and decrepit Crank has lost his capacity for dreaming and is attempting to fight death by stealing the dreams of children. Very bizarre. Human trafficking, children being held captive in some weird nether world where their tears are put into test tubes to feed some old man. Very bizarre. All right, let's see. Continuing here. Aries 106 says psyops, huh? Yeah, okay. Speaking of psyops, the word psyop, psychological operation, means theater, psychological, perception management. It doesn't necessarily mean people getting shot or killed, as in, or the portrayal of such. But psyop is different from false flag, which assumes that the event happened, but it's been misdescribed, misattributed, a scapegoat story, like OBL or Ray Epps. But PSYOP would specifically only refer to fake events, like fake from top to bottom, scripted, staged, hyper-realistic mass casualty events presented as real to an unsuspecting public. But the word PSYOP is being tainted. Elon Musk called the shooting in Allen, Texas, a PSYOP, which is accurate, but he didn't say nobody died, nobody cried. He said it's a PSYOP without defining it. So to the public, the word just means conspiracy theory. I don't believe it. They diluted it, just like they diluted the word fake. Like fake news doesn't mean total contrivance. Fake news could mean I don't believe the story because reality is subjective. Jungle Jim has joined us as best radio show around. It's going to get better when we have open phones. We have the best listeners, the best pool of listeners. Our think tank is legendary, and when we have open phones, I think it tends to really bring in a whole different element here. But the new schedule is basically this: mornings, IPS morning deprogram. Join us here 6 a.m. to about 7:30 a.m. Mountain Time. Evenings, 8:30 to about 10 p.m. And I might start earlier when I have phones just to have more time. So artificial events, simulated news events, like simulated news. Like think about flash mobs, how those work. You're in a mall and everybody there but you and your friends get up and start dancing at exactly the strike of 12 o'clock noon. Well, it's obviously pre-planned, pre-coordinated. And what I'm suggesting here is that the Boston bombing, for example, yeah, there was a marathon that happened that day, but at the end of it, at 666 Boylan Street, you had a flash mob consisting of amputee crisis actors, prosthetics, and a bunch of strange, shadowy people in hoodies applying the fake blood, knocking things over, all under the cover of military fog. Those were not crock pot bombs. But these fake events, sometimes as flash mobs, sometimes they're closed sets, like the school shootings. These are never presented with evidence, and you have to consider them fake until proven real by evidence. Or you could just choose to believe it. And most people believe the news. And my main distinction here, the point that I'm making about what we do, which is different, is we're not here to be media believers, and we're not trying to find out, well, who do we believe? Which blue checks? Do I listen to Stu Peters, Tucker Carlson, or Anderson? No, we're not. What we're doing here is we're recognizing that being a believer puts you at a disadvantage. That's the power dynamic. The knowers control the believers, and the knowers in control, the ones who know what is real and fake, are liars. That's how this lie world order works. And what we're doing is we're taking inside information as to how it works in terms of its stagecraft, in terms of the special effects, and we are applying that information to our general assessment. So we have a wider perspective rather than narrower. This isn't a red pill, it's not a woke, it's not a fringe. It's actually cutting edge media analysis because we're looking at it holistically and accurately. Going through your comments. And oh, one other thing, they didn't just start faking the news in our lifetimes. It's been faked for generations. And you can look back, intergenerational propaganda psyops that have been performed again and again. They reiterate them. Duck and cover from the nuke became duck and cover from the school shooter, became duck and cover from the guy not wearing a mask. They have these generational psyops that get you all to genuflect before state power. But think War of the Worlds, the alien invasion narrative. How long has that been around? Like, these are psychological operations contained within a universe that is defined to us by our monolithic media. And it's telling us certain stories in my mind, in my perspective, I think what they're doing is they're boring out those neural pathways so that when they present the fake news to you, it just seems like, oh yeah, this was supposed to happen. This makes sense. That whole thing about the Overton window. Yeah, they broke it. They just removed it altogether. Everything's possible. If they can fake it in the movies, they can fake it in the news and people will believe it. And sometimes it gets a little too obvious. Case in point, Palestine, Ohio, train derailment happens just like the movie about the toxic airborne event, white noise. And even CNN had to note, hey, this is weird. It's just like the movie. And some of the extras from the movie were evacuated from Palestine because of the toxic airborne event, just like the movie. And they're like, this is an eerie coincidence. Well, what I'm saying here is that there are no eerie coincidences. That, like a good liar lies to you 99% of the time. Rather, I mean, they lie to you 1% of the time. They tell truth 99%. Like you would think a liar is just constantly confabulating. No, the truth of it is the better the liar, like the more skillful they apply their techniques. So they tell you the truth most of the time to put themselves above suspicion, and they lie strategically. So most of the media is actually portraying reality. That's most of your boring news coverage, and they make it boring on purpose because reality is boring. But because they have your trust and they're just reporting the boring, mundane things day in, day out, when something big happens, something fake, when they tell you a lie, well, you're not looking at them as liars. You're looking at them as a source of information. And people have been trained and conditioned to view the TV screen as a window to the world when it has always been a filter. But they keep it clear most of the time. Most of the time, again, they hide the filter. Just like liars are generally pretty good at, hiding their inner thoughts. Going through your comments. All right, let's see here. Lean Dion says they planted bricks for peaceful protesters to smash the Overton window. Oh yeah, Freemasonry. The bricks everywhere. Erica Creech says, Tim, you need Vanna White for your whiteboard since you don't show yourself. No, I don't not show myself. I just I don't think I need my face on the screen right now. Especially because there's so many of these ridiculous transvestigators. Not that I should let it stop me, but these people are confused. I mean, really. There was one, his name is Simon Woods. And I saw one of his tweets today and it just really kind of struck me. And look, again, he blocked me, but blocking me does not stop me from seeing your tweets. And again, if you block me, I'm going to take a deeper interest in your tweets. Anyway, Simon Woods posts a picture of Clint Eastwood, like a close up of his eyes. And he says, the pretty eyes. I don't think I've ever seen this in nature. So he's just taken aback by how pretty those eyes are. Therefore, he's a woman. Like that's the confused mind of the conflicted transvestigator. The eyes are so pretty, therefore it must be a woman. Anyway, I'm pointing this out because there's a bunch of transvestigators out there, and these are the people who think that every person in media is the opposite of what they portray. And so if I go on video, I have to deal with that. And they've already done that. I mean, it's been years. And here's how it works though. You're like, well, they say that you don't have a defined brow line. But if you had one, they would call it an implant. So you just can't win. It's unfalsifiable. And then I think there are a lot of people who are predominantly, there's a whole group of people who are far more visual. And so if I do anything video wise, it's to reinforce what I'm talking about. And I do have a whiteboard for those purposes. In fact, I have a whiteboard here I was going to use at the office for mind mapping very soon here. Mind mapping is a very important part of this process. And it's not about being the crazy conspiracy guy making these connections where there are none, but it's about pointing out connections that are verifiable and could only be the result of human planning. I refuse to mystify predictive programming and say, oh, this is all just coincidence, or this is just a collective manifestation of our desires. However people say it, they're like, oh no, this is the universe is talking to us. Like they mystify it. No, you're not seeing patterns in media because you're special or God's talking to you through this medium. You're seeing the patterns that indicate it is scripted. Like you read a book, you wouldn't say the resolution is coincidental because it happened to be foreshadowed in the introduction. No, it's a script. And we're living in a script. Newsbenders from 1968 really sums it up quite well in that 30-minute theater about how and it's a play about a man who's recruited into the higher levels of the media hierarchy where he learns that they write the news 5 years in advance. And what I'm suggesting here is that our news is written in broad strokes, probably centuries in advance. And in the more nuanced, maybe it's years, maybe it's months, they have various things that they are going to achieve. And some, like for example, 9/11, 2001. Yeah, that was planned before the towers were built. It wasn't planned during Bush's administration. It wasn't planned hey, it might be a good idea to take these down. No, they were built to be taken down as part of an elaborate ritual that would take place over decades, from creation to destruction to resurrection, 46 years. Portal Complex says news is programmed 10 years in advance. Peter W. says, I watched a movie 65, sci-fi spacecraft lands on a planet full of dinosaurs. And guess what? An asteroid was coming to destroy the planet. I saw this, I think it was Barbara Walters, I don't know. Some astronaut was talking on 60 Minutes about how Mars used to be like Earth, but it was hit by an asteroid. And then part of Mars, through panspermia, spread across the solar system and rained down on the Earth and brought life. So life on Earth came from Mars when Mars's biosphere was destroyed by an asteroid, which makes us Martians. And this interview happened, and I remember watching this, and it was like a Mother's Day. I'm at my parents' house, and it's like right after there's a commercial for a new series called Salvation about an asteroid on the way to hit the Earth. And I'm like, is that a coincidence that the interview correlates to this movie that's about to... No, it's not a coincidence. That's what I mean by the meta-scripted nature of this, that you have to look at it holistically. It's all connected. Like this movie, Sound of Freedom, not created in a vacuum. It's created to fit in to this bigger picture perfectly, and it does. Tim Osman says, Hans Wormhat said I had skinny ankles and therefore a woman. Yeah, Hans Wormhat went into a inpatient treatment center for 30 days because he was convinced his dad was a woman. And he was online saying, yeah, my dad shaves his leg. I think he's a woman. They threw him into this room for 30 days and he came out, and now he's just pushing the Bible. But it breaks people. And these are the people who don't believe in gorillas and koala bears. And this is a very important point. I actually went and did some stock footage and video of gorillas here and of penguins, because a lot of these individuals will say they don't believe in something. And I'm like, okay, well, what is the problem there? Like, what are the logical fallacies? What's the error? And we need to point these out so we can separate them. Because if I say, I don't think that shooting was real, does not put me in the same category as people who say birds are fake. And the birds are fake conspiracy, by the way, was actually started by a survivor from the Parkland shooting. And it was a hoax conspiracy theory to make conspiracy theorists look crazy. They were mad because we weren't believing their psyop. Skill says, as the legacy media CIA scriptwriters were revolting and on strike, here's the news, sing along. Well, look, the writers going on strike, being replaced by AI, I think it's part of the bigger picture, like I was saying earlier, about the deluge of disinfo being decentralized. They're not going to be needed anymore. And on Twitter, it's like Twitter is fascinating to watch, especially the truth area. And I constantly get blocked. I say I get blocked because some guy will post a picture and it's obviously fake. Like, I've been having this conversation with these individuals who are promoting the idea that Disney is creating X-rated material. So they have this X-rated cartoon of Mickey Mouse poking holes in Swiss cheese, and he's not using his tail. And that is a fake clip. I mean, it's obviously fake. I didn't even have to look into it to know it was fake, but I went ahead and I looked into it and I found out, yeah, it was debunked more than 10 years ago. So I go back and I ask these individuals, why are you sharing this fake content? And they say, because Disney's bad for kids, and aren't you against that? I'm like, I am, but you're the one who's sharing the stuff. But this is that mentality. Oh, if you're not against what we're against, you're therefore for it. Kind of like Kramer in that old Seinfeld episode where he's going on the AIDS march and he doesn't want to wear the AIDS ribbon. You're like, oh, you don't want to wear the AIDS ribbon? Hey, this guy doesn't want to wear the AIDS ribbon. He's like, yeah, I'm here, right? I just don't want to wear the ribbon, because he's a nonconformist. But the people wearing the AIDS ribbon beat him up. the ribbon bullies, and it was no different than the mask bullies. But it's, it's me. What I'm saying here is that it's the peer pressure that's being applied to get you to go along with the mob. St. Lloyd says Mel Gibson's Signs was a viruses kill narrative. I'll have to rewatch that one. Signs was the one, I saw parts of it with Joaquin Phoenix where he's like beating up the aliens with a baseball bat. Yeah, truth or justice bullies, says Lean Dion. And there's a lot of them. A lot of these truther troll bot accounts, I don't think they're organic. And I think their purpose is to create a constant, just a constant chorus, like adrenochrome, Bill Gates, George Soros, oh my. It's like just constant, because not everyone's listening to Alex Jones and they're phasing that out. So now you have like 10,000 Alex Joneses, and it's just nothing but a constant barrage. So that if you veer away from the dream world, you hit this wall, and you got to confront that. All right, continuing here, we're talking about Passion of the Q. The new Oppenheimer's coming out. I'll definitely watch that. 7/16 is a big day. JFK Jr., of course, crashed that day, and there may be some significance because the guy who started the JFK Jr. coming back to Dallas cult just died last month in a motorcycle accident, supposedly. That's the thing. When all your friends are people who believe that everybody fakes their deaths, they're not going to believe it when you die. All right, let me go through my notes. I have quite a lot to go on to here. Our Gilded server has a room for deep dives. If you don't know what the IPR deep dives are, if you are a press pass carrier and you're interested in being involved in any of these stories on a deeper level, we are going deep in a number of areas here. And we've found some fascinating leads, and we've actually decoded the QAnon's original username, the so-called trip code. But it's all there. So if you want to go, and I'll probably put together some material later, separate from our live streams, to go into that room and these various areas that we're looking into, various persons of interest, topics of interest, things that are worth possibly even in-person investigations. Now, continuing, the purpose, the passion of the Q movie and Jim Caviezel and the whole marketing campaign, I actually think that the purpose of it is part of what I've been talking about, the moral panicdemic or the satanic pandemic, that it's part of this psyop. I think it's really no more than that. I think that the child trafficking thing, the Save the Children thing from QAnon, yeah, it's a real phenomenon and there is real evil, but I think it's just a political football, very cynical. And it probably detracts, and I've heard others say this, that QAnon detracts from the serious stuff. Just like the movie doesn't have the impact that an actual, documentary would have. All right, so going through my notes again, if you want to follow me, go to minds.com/Infinite Plane Society. I have a link to the new Woo's News, which I'll be doing a review on. And if you're not familiar with Woo's News, again, that's the one who takes apart January 6th. So if you still think January 6th was real and organic, or if you think it was a false flag, there's better information out there that you're not privy to or aware of. And Woo's News' content is constantly being pulled from YouTube, but you can find it on BitChute. I'll make sure you get it on my website if you get the link there, because you need to include this into your total world view. Do you want to live in the world where January 6th happened and frame everything moving forward through that frame of reference if it's not real? Obviously, you wouldn't. It matters. Your frame of reference is a major determining factor, I think, on a lot of things, not just sanity, but mental well-being and quality of life. That's why I describe the blue pill as the dream world, because it's really nice. My blue pill friends are super happy and calm. But when you start straying from that, you enter their alternate nightmare reality of red pill or woke, and you don't look at the world the same. Now the skies are toxic. Now you've got cannibal pedos everywhere. Into the Break says, what's the new Discord server called? Go into the Gilded Room, South Pole, and there's a link there. Or if you're on the newsletter, I'll just send out a link. It's mainly for animation and script writing. And I also put links to resources. So, for example, if you have some ideas for stories, but you're not a writer or you need a prompt, I highly recommend working with some of these like Chat GPT or so-called AI, something of a misnomer, but as a labor and time-saving device. All right, moving on here. Portal says stores are going cashless quickly. Use it or lose it. Yeah, I got a disturbing message, a disappointing message from Odyssey. Something's going on with LBC. And look, it seems to me that all of these alternative platforms, and we've talked about this before, they're all just honeypots and they're all put there so that you can self quarantine and not disturb the blue pill world. And then eventually they come and they destroy your little side platforms. Now, let me continue here. There's an article I had up here from cron.com with Jim Caviezel. And here it's talking about the Operation Underground Railroad. And they call it QAnon adjacent. I don't know if that's a fair description of it. But anyway, Tim Ballard actually pushed the Wayfair conspiracy theory. And when I was watching the movie, there's a point where these children are put into these crates and put on a barge and sent out across the ocean. And it reminded me of the Wayfair conspiracies. And again, Wayfair is the one about how when you order furniture from them, if the price is really high, it'll include like a child, like inside of the cabinet or something. Well, the Wayfair conspiracy theory was explained away, had to do with the way that these catalogs would raise their prices to prevent purchases. I don't know, some kind of procedure they had, some standard operating procedure. It wasn't that they were selling these objects at ridiculously inflated prices, much less as a cover for selling children, like it's just an online ordering site for kids. It wasn't that. But Ballard actually pushed that in 2020. Again, that the furniture company is a front for selling kids. And I think that's kind of strange that Ballard would push something so unserious, which really calls everything else into question. Maybe he's Paul Walker. And this is all just some elaborate act. Ballard also appeared in a photo posted to Senator Cruz's Instagram alongside Caviezel. Operation Underground Railroad has attempted to distance itself from QAnon in the past. Again, good luck with that. Good luck with that. So this is definitely a QAnon movie. That's my final summation of it. It's a QAnon movie. Again, with the trains and the railroads, says Lean Dion. Fascinating. Yeah, trains and railroads, planes, these things, they appear in the news, these events like the train derailments, and there's usually a subtext, like the Titanic sinking. And there's a story attached to that. It's a metaphor for the West, or too big to fail. Well, railroads have been used symbolically ever since Palestine to symbolize the arteries of our political and economic system and how America's arteries are clogged because of greed and deregulation. Now it's unsustainable. And every train derailment represents a heart attack as the system is dying. So the trains are a symbol in Snowpiercer. And one of the things they represent is a closed system. They can't get off and they have to stop the train. This was the theme behind the subway trains, where Jordan Neely was strangled and he's like, I'm going to kill somebody on this train. Well, what was the point of this? The train represents capitalism, runaway political economic system run by greed, and it's going to kill us all if we don't stop it. That's kind of the idea here. And the subway specifically represents the underclass and an uprising. This is why the right wing for the last year has been sharing subway violence videos and saying, get out of the cities, get out, get out. They all said it. I said, why are they all saying, get out? run to the cities, quarantine. Well, now I know why. Because the Jordan Neely psyop has all the hallmarks of being fake, and the predictive programming for it is in the work of Jordan Peele, specifically the movie Get Out, which has a Daniel Penny looking guy who strangles somebody. Like the whole thing is, again, fake and contrived, but it's all symbolic. The subways are symbolic, the trains are symbolic. I mean, if you remember last year, when the new Batman movie came out on March 4th, you had the concurrent subway shooting where Frank James fired, how many rounds was it, into the only subway train that didn't have any cameras? Anybody want to answer that? Frank James shoots up a subway after telling the mayor he's not doing enough for the mentally ill and the poor. Well, what was Jordan Neely getting violent about? Same thing, that he wasn't being taken care of as mentally ill and poor. So there's a theme here. The Joker in the Joker movie, 2019, starts off in a subway. And he shoots the rich bastards. It's kill the rich because he's poor. He's in the subway. It's class warfare. The subway, again, representing the underclass. Yeah, Frank James shot 33 rounds. Then the new Batman movie comes out, and it's in a subway. Only this time, it's the Batman taking out the Jokers. So if you didn't connect it, the way that they've played these Batman Joker characters and archetypes of the movies, Batman represents the right, the fringe right, the vigilante. They want basically the Tim Ballard going against the entrenched bureaucracy of the deep state. And the Joker represents the left, the underclass, the oppressed, the ones who've been made clowns by the system. So the Joker Batman dialectic is constantly at play here. That's why when the new Batman movie came out, the Boston bomber named Joker, Joker Sarnoff, had his death penalty reinstated. This Batman Joker dialectic is huge, just as Christopher Nolan's movies like Dark Knight Rising are very well represented in all the major psyops. Dark Knight Rises has predictive programming for COVID. The burning bat, the bat as Phoenix, makes perfect sense because the reset, the Phoenix, burn down, build back better, was catalyzed by a bat. Also, again, Christopher Nolan directed the Oppenheimer, which comes out in a few days. A movie which is IMAX, and the footage was 11 miles long, weighs 600 pounds. Another conspicuous 6'11", again attached to this nuke narrative. But Christopher Nolan also has a connection to someone named Nathan Crowley, who's related to Elisha Crowley, which could explain quite a lot there as well. I'm going through your comments. Claptrapism says, Pete Davidson is like Kenny from South Park. He dies a lot. Well, I had predicted that Ye was going to kill him by going OJ. And he did. But he was killed multiple times by Ye and Musk and others. But it was always symbolic. He was killed in the movie Home. He was killed by Ye in a music video where he gets buried in a garden and then roses are planted there. And then Ye sends a truck with its bed full of roses over to Kim and Pete where they were staying together. Then his head was exploded. Pete Davidson's head was exploded in a Saturday Night Live skit with Elon Musk where he goes to Mars and he takes off his helmet. Then he was killed in that Suicide Squad, which I didn't watch. And then his dad died on 9/11 in one of the Twin Towers at the age of 33. There's a lot of 33-year-olds who died in those towers that day, and there's a few. And I was actually kind of taken aback when I did some digging into this, because what you find here is it's all tied into the same ritual structure and language. For example, the number 33, that's how old the towers were, by the way, is consistently associated with the Burning Man, the Christ, the Phoenix, the crown. Claptrapism says, Pete dies in the new Transformers 2. Well, I started to watch the movie King of Staten Island, and it begins where he's driving, and they have this car accident behind him. These two cars crash like the Twin Towers, and he turns on his radio, and I think it's like 11:13 or 11:30. And again, the new tower opened on 11:03. Tom 2 says Nathan Crowley recreates Apollo in First Man, released on Crowley's birthday. Now, speaking of First Man, I was thinking about the symbolism behind Oppenheimer and the Trinity site and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, splitting the atom definitely ties into this bigger theme we've been talking about with the Kraken and the crack in everything, the crack in the dam. And like, let me just reiterate a couple things. Like in the Batman movie, the Riddler sends his terrorists to crack the dam, to blow it up, to flood the polls. And this was last year when the midterm slogan for the GOP was flood the polls. So you have this theme here. Well, in the movie, Gotham goes underwater on 11/6. And this is why I say it's significant, because 11/6, 6/11, 9/11, these numbers are all very well correlated. McVeigh executed 6/11. So there's this reoccurring theme. And then Oppenheimer is 11 miles long, weighs 600 pounds. And so what I'm pointing out here is that there is a reoccurring theme that has to do with this crack, the schism, the ideological schism, the political divide, and then the splitting of the atom, the crack in everything. It couldn't be any, I think, more consistent than the nuke representing this split in everything. Then I thought, the splitting of atom is kind of interesting in itself, just because phonetically, like Adam is the first man, splitting Adam to make Eve, primordial creation, create out of the mud. Like there's something about this that I think might have more esoteric significance than anything. Because nukes are fake. But just because nukes are a fake psychological ploy that they use to cow the masses, just like the vengeful flooding god is fake, just like global warming is fake, nukes are fake. But just because it's fake doesn't mean that there's not some esoteric meaning behind it, having to do with some kind of mass alchemical transformation as we move into our transhumanist age, which has already kicked off. I mean, the Great Reset wasn't something they dreamed up recently. I mean, it started on 12/21/2020, but the Great Reset is really what the occultists and the Freemasons have called the Great Work. The Great Work of Ages. Or the Greta Reset. If you really want to understand it, just call it the Greta Reset. I mean, what does that mean? Well, it's essentially the green world order. And of course, the Gaia worship, that's just, really, it's just earth worship. It's a return or a reiteration of this older paradigm, but given a scientific pretext. I mean, they're trying to reintroduce Gaia, the Global AI Alliance from the WEF, as this interconnectedness that we're all going to experience. I mean, to me, this is like the fact that they named it Gaia after an earth god. It's right out of the movie Avatar 2. There's a number of strong connections here that Gaia worship was introduced to us when we were shown the blue marble. That kicked off the environmentalist religion. It really did catalyze it when they saw the globe. But I think what they're doing now is now they want us to mentally connect to it. And this Gaia initiative is a big part of that. I mean, that was the main subtext of the Avatar movie, where the Na'vi could plug their long hair into the ground, into a tree, into a fish, and connect with the world's soul. And you find out that Gaia was alive, but man killed her with all the oil rigs and fossil fuel harvesting and pollution and capitalism and racism. We killed Gaia. So we need Pandora, which is alive. But the indigenous people know Pandora's alive. So the Marines go to war with the indigenous people. Interestingly, that movie Avatar 2, The Way of Water, has the people who are like Atlanteans. And it kind of ties in, I think, it definitely ties in to the riots earlier this year in Atlanta, where environmentalists were fighting the cops because the cops want to take over the forest adjacent to Atlanta and turn it into a cop training facility called Cop City. So the environmentalists fight with the cops. And I'm like, this is exactly like the movie Avatar 2. Well, they kill a guy. They kill an environmentalist. He's like this first eco martyr. And the autopsy shows he was shot through the palms of his hands, like Jesus. So I'm looking through his photos, and he's pictured in like a treehouse with a copy of Where the Wild Things Are and Goodnight Moon. And I'm like, these could easily be construed as more connections to Avatar because Pandora is a moon. It's a lush jungle moon. And where the wild things are is about this kid who goes to this island where these big monstrous things are, but he has his wolf costume and he becomes their king. Well, in Avatar, the main character puts on his monster suit, his avatar suit, and he becomes their ruler. So there's a connection between where the wild things are, Goodnight Moon, and the Pandora jungle moon, and the main martyr of the environmentalist activists who were there in Atlanta fighting the cops. And it happened right after the movie. I actually wrote a review. And so I've been talking about this and the role of James Cameron in the bigger picture for some time, which is why it's fascinating that it turns out that, he's so central to this latest psyop that occurred on the summer solstice with the submarine and the whole Titanic narrative. I mean, Cameron is super interesting when you get into it. You're like, wow. I mean, speaking of Gaia and the Global AI Alliance, James Cameron brings you Skynet. The Terminator with his one red eye, that's the eye that connects to this global AI government. So Skynet and Gaia are very much correlated here. Lean Dion says the new Avatar was at the same time as the UN focus on water meetings. Yeah, exactly. And Ellen DeGeneres had a flood in her backyard. Yeah, if you remember, there were all sorts of tie-ins to the Avatar movie. My contention after watching it and immersing myself in that, it's blue. The whole movie's nothing but blue. The people are blue. And the point of it is, I was saying, is that this is to give the present generation the blue marble experience, the bonding with Gaia that they had 50 years ago when they were shown the Earth for the first time. But this was showing, because the whole movie was pretty much about bonding with the Earth as a living entity, and those who don't want to bond with it are because it's toxic masculinity. The Marines all have short hair; they can't connect to the Earth. But it's pretty much a parody, if you ask me. I mean, James Cameron even said testosterone is a toxin. The movie rips off of a lot of movies like Dances with Wolves. I mean, Dances with Wolves. Kevin Costner leaves he's a deserter, and he goes and he joins the indigenous, and their life is built around the buffalo. And then the white man comes and they wipe out the buffalo and just skin it and leave the meat. And there's this huge travesty. Well, they have a scene just like that in Avatar 2, where the Atlantean type Na'vi base their lives around not buffalo, but these big whale-like creatures. And just like in Dances with Wolves, these things are killed for sport by the marine types. Joined by Penguin Doctor, Peter Pan. G33 says, speaking of Tim, I was on my way home from work. There's a car in front of me with a license plate that said Work 33 and a Freemason badge on the trunk. I took a good picture of it. Yeah, if you want to share it, you could post it at Twitter at RealTimOsman, or I would recommend getting into our Gilded server. I think you can also post links here if you just have a hot link. If you prefer Discord, we do have one, but it's mostly for animation. I'm working on a project, and I'm going to be using animations for many of the transitions. Okay, so tonight we've been talking about Oppenheimer a little bit, Ray Epps, and how I think Tucker Carlson is the biggest Judas goat in controlled opposition, bigger than Alex Jones even. We're talking about the Passion of the Q, the persecution of Mel Gibson, Tim Ballard, Jim Caviezel, and how the whole movie is obviously a cynical ploy to bring back the Q blood libel. Not that it was a terrible movie, but again, I don't think it's not an enjoyable movie in that sense. I'm sure it's a well-crafted movie, but again, a documentary. So if you're looking to be entertained, it's not the movie for you. If you want to be informed, yeah, but you could be informed about the number of people being trafficked by looking at the statistics they show you in the final 30 seconds of the film. All right, let me go through my tweets again at Real Tim Osman. You can follow my tweets there. I'll probably go watch Oppenheimer next. Now, this is a tweet from Toddy Kins who says about Jim Caviezel. Jim is an anon, so he's one of us. So when they attack him, you feel as though he's attacking you personally, so you defend him. Interesting point there. Yeah, I think it's a marketing strategy. Like the I'm being censored, come listen to me. Here's a tweet that somebody liked of mine today, and it was from February 23rd, 2021. So this tweet is 2 years old. Am I prescient, or is the program just that obvious? Here's what I said, quote, do you believe there is a world genocide plan and that we're all going to die, whether climate change, vax deaths, second coming, or asteroids? Is the end near? I don't believe so. Hashtag fearocracy. So I put that out there, hoping I wouldn't have to eat my words, knowing I wouldn't. It's been 2 years, and a lot of people agreed, yeah, the world's going to end. We're in the end times. Well, it hasn't happened yet. Has anybody checked the ocean levels? Anybody by the ocean? Could you put a ruler in there and just take a look? Have the levels gone up at all? Aside from the millimeter they went up from the 57 tons of PPE, mostly dropped by people who believe in climate change. Travis Scott, who was not tried for murder. Travis Scott's the guy who auto-tuned like 9 people to death at the Astro World Satanic Ritual concert a couple of years ago. He is going to now perform Utopia at the Egyptian pyramids. So it's a whole album. Again, Travis Scott performing Utopia at the pyramids in Egypt. So what is it going to be? Another human sacrifice in the making? Probably. Make sure we'll be watching that. We've been talking about the disinfo deluge and how it's being decentralized. Going to open up phones very soon. I know there's a few people want to call in. We had a bit of a back and forth last night with Agent Smith, who said that I'm a Pfizer shill and I'm doing an infomercial for Bill Gates and the CIA. Which, if it were true, honestly, I would have a better office. Not that this is a bad office; it's perfect for what I have. But I would have certainly a better funding. I would at least have 50,000 subs on Twitter. Okay, yeah. If you want to join Twitter, look, I understand not wanting to buy a blue check. I bought a blue check, but only because it allows me to upload long videos. So another place to get the Infinite Plane Radio archives will be Twitter. So if you're wondering where to get it, if you don't follow any of the podcasts, you can follow me at Twitter and I will upload there as well. Anyway, this has been great. If you want to join us tomorrow morning for the IPS Morning deprogram, and hopefully by tomorrow we'll have our router and our phones back up. So it's something to look forward to. We have a lot of people who want to call in, and I am going to have office hours where I will be able to take calls on many topics, not necessarily live, although I do tend to record so we can put it into the podcast feeds if these are topics worth exploring. But I'm 100% open to debating and conversing on anything. But I want to do so in a very productive manner leading forward. All right, go ahead and go to ips.monster. I put a link below. I think there's about 70 people here. Thank you all for hanging out. Again, see you all tomorrow morning, and get on the newsletter, and I'll have the archives out in about half an hour.